It happened just after sunrise, on the stretch of Old County Road where the hills soften and the morning fog still clings to the wheat stubble like breath on a mirror. The asphalt was slick with dew, the kind that glints gold when caught by the first hard light. Most drivers were still asleep, but the milk truck had just come around the bend, and the driver, an aging man named Walt, had seconds to react. The dog came from nowhere, a blur of black and brindle, lean but not wild, sprinting straight across the road, not running away from something, but toward it, head low, eyes locked ahead, tail stiff like a pointer. Walt hit the brakes hard enough to jolt the bottles behind him, the crate doors banging in protest. The dog cleared the front bumper by inches. Had she hesitated, she would have gone under. But what Walt remembered most wasn't the near miss. It was what the dog did next. She stopped on the opposite shoulder, turned around, and stared at him. Not a panicked glance, a still, deliberate stare, as if she'd been waiting for someone to see her, as if she was asking for something. Then she turned and ran, not into the woods, not down the open field, but along the gravel embankment, back the way she'd come, following the edge of the road with a mechanical focus that made the hair on Walt's arms stand up. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe it was the eyes. Maybe it was the way she paused, just long enough, like she needed him to follow. Maybe it was because Walt had seen things before, things that didn't make sense at first but later did, in ways he could never explain. Or maybe it was just because he had nowhere else to be that morning, so he put the truck in park, left the hazard lights blinking, and followed on foot. The shoulder narrowed quickly. The fog here was thicker, more stubborn. It pooled between the dry ditch grass and spilled down toward a thin stand of poplars just barely stirring in the breeze. The dog kept her pace, never looked back, always just far enough ahead to stay in view. Walt's boots crunched softly on gravel, the sound strangely loud in the hush of early morning. He should have been irritated. Instead he felt uneasy. The road here was rural and forgotten, flanked by barbed fences and sagging wooden posts that hadn't seen livestock in years. There were no tire tracks in the mud, no footprints, just the occasional glint of beer cans or a twisted old feed bucket rusting into the ground. The kind of place where stories happen, but no one ever tells them. Walt rounded a curve and stopped. The dog had too. She was standing completely still in the center of a narrow bridge, where the road crossed a shallow stream now half-choked with cattails and trash. Her body was tense, not fearful, watchful. She didn't turn to look at him this time, just waited. Then she stepped aside, off the bridge, and vanished into the trees. Walt approached slowly, feeling the sweat collect along his collarbone despite the cool air. The bridge creaked underfoot. One of the wooden guardrails had snapped off, probably last winter, judging by the splinters silvering from exposure. Beneath the bridge, the stream made no sound at all, just a slow ripple around dark stones and the odd shape of a bicycle tire barely submerged beneath the surface. Then he saw it at the base of the tree line, where the ditch dipped into a shadowy pocket, thick with nettles and wind-felled branches. Something was moving, not thrashing, not fleeing, just shifting. He stepped off the pavement and immediately felt the ground change, soft, spongy. The scent of wet earth rising up, mingled with something fainter and sharper. He pushed through the underbrush slowly, quietly, the way a man does when he doesn't know if what he's approaching is injured or dangerous. The branches parted at first. It looked like a heap of blankets or discarded clothing, but then he saw the leg, pale, small and motionless, half hidden under an oversized hoodie, one shoe on, the other gone. A child, she was alive, barely. Her eyelids fluttered once, then closed again. He heard the soft crunch of paws behind him. Turned. The dog had returned, panting gently, her eyes fixed not on the girl but on him. And in that moment it was clear she hadn't run to escape. She'd run to find someone who could help. Walt knelt down beside the girl, his hands shaking more than he expected. His radio was still in the truck. Cell service out here was patchy at best. He looked up at the dog again, who sat down quietly on the edge of the clearing, as if she too was waiting to see what he would do next. The sun broke through then, pale and slanting, casting long shadows across the undergrowth. A crow called out from somewhere behind them. The breeze shifted, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, and just like that, Walt knew this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. The girl's breath was shallow, lips tinged with blue, her fingers curled against her chest like she was still holding something though her hands were empty. Walt hovered beside her, afraid to move her, and equally afraid not to. Every instinct told him not to waste time, but his limbs felt heavy, slowed by the weight of uncertainty. The dog didn't move. She sat like a sentinel at the edge of the bramble, ears high, body still. Her focus wasn't frantic. It was expectant, as if she'd done her part and was waiting to see if Walt would do his. He took off his jacket and folded it beneath the girl's head. His hands trembled as he brushed pine needles and damp leaf litter from her cheek. She didn't stir. There was a faint warmth still in her skin, but her breathing was erratic, fluttering, like it might stop at any moment. The woods around them were quiet, but not in the peaceful sense. It was the hush that follows something sudden, like a pause. After a storm or the breath held between one decision and the next. Walt stood and turned to the dog. "Stay with her," he said softly, unsure why he believed she'd understand, but she didn't follow when he ran. The truck was still there. Engine idling, hazard lights blinking slow amber pulses in the mist. He grabbed the radio from the dash and called it in. Child found unconscious. Possible exposure. Injuries unknown. Location approximate at best. It would take them at least 20 minutes to get a chopper overhead, maybe longer by ground. He returned fast, slipping once on the embankment and slicing his hand on a rusted fence post. Blood ran down his wrist, but he didn't stop. When he reached the thicket again, the girl hadn't moved, but the dog was gone. The moment cracked like a fault line. He scanned the trees, called out softly, but the forest returned only stillness. Then, he heard Ita's single bark, far off. Then another, urgent, not afraid, calling. He hesitated. The girl was still breathing but barely. Help was on the way. And yet, there was something about the sound. It wasn't random, it wasn't wild. It was tethered to something. Walt looked at the girl, then toward the trees. He made his decision without fully understanding it. He followed the sound. The underbrush thickened, but the path, if it could be called that, twisted gently upward, into the tree line where the fog hadn't yet broken. Twigs snapped underfoot. The scent of lichen and wet bark filled his lungs, mingling now with the copper taste of adrenaline. The dog barked again, closer now. Then silence. Walt emerged into a small clearing where the trees grew in a loose ring around what once might have been a foundation. Stone blocks, moss-covered, long abandoned. At the center was the dog. She wasn't barking anymore. She was pacing, circling something. And when Walt came closer, his heart lurched. It was another child, a boy this time, maybe 8, curled into himself on the ground, arms wrapped tight around a tan puppy that was shivering against his chest. The boy's eyes were open, wide but unblinking, lost in that vacant way that comes after hours of fear. Walt dropped to his knees beside him. The boy didn't respond at first. Then, with a voice so soft it barely registered, he whispered, "She came back." Walt looked at the dog. "She brought you," the boy said. "She went for help." The dog sat beside him now, her ribs moving, visibly with each breath. She lowered her head to the boy's shoulder, gently, as if to say it was all right. Walt couldn't speak for a moment. There were too many pieces, too many questions. Why were these children out here? Where had they come from? How had the dog known what to do? He tapped the radio again, giving new coordinates, voice rough with urgency. The dispatcher's voice returned. "Chopper inbound, ETA 12 minutes. Walt wrapped his arms around the boy, and the puppy both. The boy didn't resist, just leaned into him, trembling like a leaf clinging to the last of autumn. The dog remained still, her body positioned just so, blocking the wind, eyes scanning the trees as if the danger wasn't over yet. She wasn't protecting just the boy. She was watching something else. Something Walt hadn't yet seen. He looked past her into the woods, and for the first time, he noticed the trail. It wasn't wide, just a pressed line of disturbed leaves. Faint prints too large for a child, too scattered for a deer. It led deeper into the woods, not a path of escape, a path of approach. Walt's chest tightened. The dog stood up again, ears perked. Somewhere in the near distance, a branch snapped. The wind shifted. The woods grew suddenly colder. The silence returned, but it felt different this time. Less like waiting, more like warning. The dog didn't move when Walt stood. She stayed at the edge of the thicket, eyes steady, as if waiting for some unseen verdict. The girl lay motionless in the undergrowth, her breath shallow, a dark smear just behind her ear where soil clung to blood. Walt reached into his jacket, pulled out the flannel he always kept rolled behind the seat, and pressed it gently against her temple. No cry, no wince, just a small, involuntary twitch of her fingers. The stillness around them thickened. No wind, no birdsong. Even the stream under the bridge seemed to have stilled, as if the world around them was watching too. He glanced back at the road, at the soft orange blink of his hazard lights barely visible through the trees. Too far to carry her in one trip, and she was so small, but so terribly still. His mind calculated the distance. 4, maybe 5 minutes to fetch the radio, another 10 for emergency dispatch, then longer, God knows how long for anyone, to reach this stretch of forgotten gravel. Walt stood, gaze flicking between girl and dog, then finally spoke, voice low, like he was trying not to disturb the gravity of what had just begun. Stay. He didn't know why he said it. Maybe to himself, maybe to her. He turned, backtracking fast across the damp ground. The brush scratched his calves, the smell of crushed nettle rising sharp in his nostrils. The bridge creaked again as he crossed it. Every step now felt like trespass, like whatever rhythm nature had held was unraveling underfoot. Inside the cab, the radio buzzed softly before he keyed it. "This is Walt. I've got a child. Female found unconscious near the crossing by mile marker 42. Minor head trauma. Not responsive. I need a bus dispatched." The silence that followed was too long. Then a crackle. "Copy that. Walt, EMTs en route. Closest team coming from Glenford. Estimated arrival 37 minutes. Too long." He was already running again, but when he returned to the thicket, he stopped short. The girl hadn't moved, but the dog she was no longer beside her. Instead, she was facing away, ears flat, body low and tense, pointed toward the tree line. Walt followed her line of sight. Nothing but shadow. Then dash movement, a rustle, a low shuffle. Walt stepped forward. Instinctively, hand out like he could calm the air itself. The dog growled, but it wasn't loud. It was a warning wrapped in restraint. Then the shape emerged, a man thin mid-50s, maybe older, though the weathered face and matted gray beard made it hard to tell. He wore a sun-bleached jacket tied at the waist with baling twine, mud on his cuffs, one boot half-laced, the other dragging slightly like he favored one leg. His eyes flicked to Walt, then down to the girl. No shock, no panic, just a tired, guarded wariness. "She yours?" Walt asked. The man didn't answer. The dog didn't look at him. Her growl deepened. "She's bleeding. Barely breathing," Walt said again, stepping slowly between the girl and the man. "Did you see what happened?" This time the man gave a small shake of the head. "Didn't see, heard." His voice was rough, barely more than gravel. Walt studied him, trying to read the layers behind the silence. Not just poverty, something older, something with weight. A man who'd been unseen for a long time. "You live back there, off and on. You see anyone else out here?" A pause. Then, "No one lately. Not since the storm last week." Walt crouched beside the girl. Again, her breaths were growing more uneven. He adjusted the flannel, glanced up. The dog still hadn't moved. The man hadn't either. "She came to get me," Walt said, nodding toward the dog. "Ran into the road like her life depended on it." The man's eyes didn't change, but something tightened in his shoulders. A flicker of recognition. "Maybe. She's not mine," he said after a moment, "but she's been around. Stays out here sometimes. Smart girl." Walt looked back at the dog. She was trembling now barely, but it was there. He saw it in the set of her legs, in the way her chest rose and fell, just slightly faster than before. "She knew where she was going," Walt said quietly. "She knew who to find." Neither the man nor the dog responded, but the silence between them was no longer empty. Walt checked his watch. 26 minutes to EMT arrival, maybe more depending on terrain. Too long to wait and do nothing. "She needs to get to the road," he said aloud. "Now." The man shifted. "You won't make it far, carrying her alone." "I don't plan to." Walt looked at the dog again. "But I think she might lead the way back." The wind picked up then, sudden and cold, threading through the trees, like a warning. The cattails in the ditch rustled, and a crow cried out far off in the distance, nature stirring again. Walt rose slowly, lifting the girl into his arms. She was lighter than expected, but limp, too limp. He looked at the dog. She stood, took a step toward the bridge, then paused, turned her head just enough to check that he was following. Walt adjusted his grip. "Go on then." The dog moved forward, silent and steady, her paws sure over the soft earth. Walt followed, and behind them the man watched, still as stone, one hand slowly tightening around the frayed edge of his coat. He said nothing, but he didn't turn away. The girl's breathing was shallow but steady. Walt pressed 2 fingers gently to her neck, feeling for a pulse, not because he didn't trust what he saw, but because he needed to feel it. The dog didn't move. She watched from the edge of the clearing, still as the stones beneath the stream of breeze picked up, threading through the poplars overhead. It wasn't strong, but it brought a low murmur to the leaves, like the sound of distant water or voices just out of reach. Walt looked up toward the road, measuring distance. The truck was maybe 60 yards back, just around the bend, but he hesitated. The girl's hand twitched. Not a full movement, just a curl of the fingers against the dirt. Walt knelt closer. Her skin was cool, not cold, but close, too close. Her mouth moved, no words, only a dry, broken exhale, the kind that carried no shape but hinted at something unfinished. The dog stood, ears angled forward, body shifting subtly, not toward the girl, but toward the trees behind them. Then came the sound, faint, irregular, a rustle, then silence. Walt rose slowly, not afraid, but alert, in that quiet way older men get when they've seen enough to stop assuming things will turn out all right. He stepped between the girl and the woods. The rustle came again, lower this time. Then the distinct snap of a branch under pressure. The dog's tail was stiff now, no longer neutral, not aggressive, not friendly. She didn't growl, but her body was warning. Walt stayed still. The clearing grew heavy with quiet. The birds, which had begun their usual morning calls, fell silent. Even the stream seemed to pause its shallow flow. The world held its breath again, but this time, something had changed. It wasn't waiting for help. It was watching. And then came the cough, not from the trees, from the girl, a short, sharp choke that pulled her partly upright, enough to reveal the patch of dark red soaked through the back of her sweatshirt, not new, but not yet dried. Walt moved fast, cradled her upright, supporting her weight with both arms. She winced, but didn't resist. Her eyes flickered open only for a moment, long enough to meet his, then they closed again. "I've got you," he said softly. He didn't know if she heard. The dog stepped closer now, standing just behind him, so close he could feel her breath against his leg. Not pressing, not pushing, just there, as if to say, I brought you this far. You take it from here. Walt looked up toward the road once more and froze. The truck's hazard lights were no longer blinking. Walt didn't move. He stood at the edge of the clearing, holding the girl in his arms, eyes locked on the truck now shrouded in stillness. The blinking hazards had stopped. The engine, once humming faintly, had gone silent. No sound of tires, no footsteps, nothing. Only the breeze, slower now, curling through the tops of the trees like a sigh. The dog had gone tense again, her head low, ears angled toward the road, her body half turned as though anticipating something or someone, but she didn't bark, didn't growl. She waited, the way animals do when they already know the answer. Walt took a step forward, then another dot with the girl pressed against him. He moved as if walking through water, heavy, deliberate. Never taking his eyes from the truck, he reached the shoulder. The dog followed, silent as a shadow. From this angle, the road curved slightly, sloping just enough to hide what waited beyond the front fender. A shape, a blur. Then Walt saw it, a man, slumped against the side of the cab, one hand still reaching toward the door, the other resting loosely in the dirt. A tire iron lay just behind him, untouched, his head bowed low, as if in prayer. Blood pooled near his shoulder, dark and spreading slowly beneath the gravel, a smear on the door where he must have tried to get in. Walt didn't speak, he didn't need to. The girl stirred slightly, a faint whimper escaping her lips. It snapped him, back to the moment. He pulled the door open, laid her gently across the bench seat, reached for the old emergency blanket behind the console, tucked it around her legs. His fingers worked on instinct, checking her breathing, feeling for the warmth behind her neck, tucking a rag beneath her head to keep her upright. The dog leaped into the passenger side without waiting to be asked. She sat, alert, eyes never leaving the tree line behind them. Walt climbed in, turned the key. The truck hesitated, then caught. A low rumble filled the silence. He reversed gently, steering around the fallen man with a slow, reverent wheel, not because he didn't care, but because some things had already happened and couldn't be undone. As the truck pulled away, Walt caught one final glimpse of the man's form in the rearview mirror. The sun had reached the edge of the ridge now, casting long morning shadows across the road. One of them fell over the man's outstretched hand, the same way it once fell over Walt's father the day he collapsed in the barn and never stood again. By the time they reached the turnoff, the girl had fallen back into a half-sleep. Her breath was steadier now. The worst for her had passed, but it would leave a mark, the kind that doesn't show up on skin. The dog hadn't looked away once. When they reached the emergency station just outside the next town, Walt laid the girl into the arms of a medic without ceremony. He said her name because she'd whispered it just once, halfway through the drive. Myra. Then he stepped back. She was safe now, or as safe as any child could be. The dog didn't follow the medics. She waited by the truck. And when Walt returned, she looked up at him, not expectant, not desperate, but steady, as if to ask, now what? He opened the passenger door. Come on, he said. She jumped in. They didn't go home. Walt didn't really have one anymore, not in the way people mean when they say that word. But he drove toward the hills, toward the land where silence is cleaner, and the trees aren't waiting to surprise you, only to outlive you. They stopped near the fence line of an old orchard, long since abandoned but still blooming in spring like it didn't know it had been forgotten. The dog stepped out first, nose to the breeze, tail loose and at peace. Walt followed. He didn't pet her, didn't speak, but they stood together in the tall grass, the wind brushing past like the breath of someone they'd once known, and in that stillness, not sadness, not joy, but something older, a quiet truth settled between them. Some animals run to escape, some run to survive, and some run to save what they can before it's too late. The dog turned, ears flicking gently in the breeze, and trotted into the field, not fleeing, just wandering. A shadow stretched across the grass behind her, long and certain. Walt watched her go. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone.